My name is Tessa. I'm 29. Last winter, my dad yelled from the stairs, "Your toxic energy is ruining her. Grab your suitcases. You have 15 minutes to leave." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I packed 2 heavy leather bags I kept under my bed, and I walked out into a freezing snowstorm without a single tear. My sister stood by the door the whole time. She faked crying as I walked past her. They said nothing for 21 days, not one text, not one call. Then my dad rang, then Mom, then my sister. I ignored every single one. Those 21 days of silence didn't break me. They gave me what I desperately needed: the truth. Before I take you back to that night, take a second to like and subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Now let me take you back to a freezing Tuesday evening in December, the night my family chose to throw me out into a snowstorm rather than face the truth. I was standing by the kitchen island, wiping down the marble countertops. It was a bitterly cold night. The wind was howling against the frosted windows, and the whole house smelled like peppermint and burning firewood. Everything seemed quiet, except Jillian had been in my parents' home office with the door shut for over an hour. I could hear her loud, dramatic sobbing echoing down the hallway. My mother's voice was a soft hum, constantly repeating, "Hush now, it's not your fault." I tossed the cleaning rag into the sink and picked up my warm mug of cocoa. That's when the heavy oak door flew open. My mother marched out first. Her face wasn't just decided, it was twisted with a deep, toxic blame. "Your sister loses her mind and drops to a 40% grade every single time you walk into the kitchen," my dad roared from the 3rd-floor landing. His voice boomed through the quiet house, sharp and full of poison. He stomped down the stairs, his face red with anger. "Grab your 2 suitcases, you have 15 minutes to leave." I looked past him. My sister Jillian was slumped against the office doorframe, clutching a wet tissue to her chest, pretending to hyperventilate. "Are you kicking me out because she failed her college exams?" I asked, my voice completely steady despite the shock. "We are kicking you out because your toxic energy is destroying her future," my mother hissed, pointing a shaking finger at the front door. I didn't argue. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, the cold hardwood freezing my bare feet. I pulled 2 heavy leather suitcases from beneath my bed and packed my entire life away in exactly 14 minutes. I didn't shed a single tear. My great-aunt Farah, my grandmother's sister, had always told me, "Tessa, tears are for people who care about you. Never waste them on a dry desert." Farah was my absolute rock, the only person who truly loved me after my grandmother passed away. 4 days before I packed those suitcases, the real nightmare began. That is where this story actually starts. I was sitting in the living room, helping my dad organize the family safe because his eyesight was failing. That's when I noticed it. A thick legal envelope containing the deed and the $500,000 trust documents that Great-Aunt Farah had legally set aside for the family's emergency fund was completely gone. I didn't bring it up to start a war. I brought it up because that money was secured for our future, and $500,000 vanishing into thin air is a massive crime. "Jillian," I said at the dinner table later that night, putting my fork down, "the trust documents for the $500,000 are missing from the safe, and you are the only one who asked for the combination last week." She didn't even blink. Instead, her bottom lip started to quiver. "You went through my things? You are always spying on me." "I didn't spy. Dad asked me to clean the safe. The envelope is missing." Her eyes instantly filled with tears. It was like watching a terrible actress perform in a cheap movie. "I can't take this," she screamed, knocking her glass of water over. The water shattered across the floor. "You know I have midterms. You know my anxiety is through the roof. You just want me to fail my business degree." She ran upstairs. And then my mother was standing up, slamming her hands on the dining table. "Look what you did. You are trying to sabotage her education over some misplaced papers." Jillian's weapon was never logic. It was playing the absolute victim. That night wasn't a random explosion. It was the result of a pattern that started when I was 10 years old. That was the year my mother forced me to give up my lead role in the school play because Jillian cried that she wasn't picked. I didn't fight back. I stepped down and my dad bought Jillian ice cream to celebrate her bravery. When I was 23, I graduated with top honors from my master's program. My parents came to the ceremony, but they spent the entire time in the lobby because Jillian claimed the auditorium seats hurt her back. At 29, I bought my very first home with my own hard-earned savings. I invited them over for dinner. My mother said, "We can't come, Tessa. Jillian's car broke down and she is too depressed to see you show off your new house." Every single achievement I earned was crushed under the weight of Jillian's endless stream of fake tragedies. I kept working hard because I foolishly believed they would eventually love me for who I was. As I walked down the stairs with my 2 suitcases, the house was dead silent. I walked past my father. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. He just stared at the ugly floral wallpaper. He had my entire life to be a real dad, to protect me. But tonight he was just a coward hiding behind his favorite child. I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the freezing December snow. The cold wind hit my face, but I felt oddly warm inside. Anger still hopes for an apology. I was just done. I dragged my 2 heavy leather suitcases through the thick biting snow for 3 long blocks to the train station. The wheels kept getting stuck in the slush, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I just needed to get as far away from that toxic house as possible. It was a 45-mile train ride in the dead of night to New York, and the train carriage was completely empty except for me. I sat by the frosty window, watching the dark frozen trees blur past. My phone sat perfectly still in my pocket. Not a single text, not a single call. Let me tell you about the version of my sister that nobody else sees. Jillian is 24 now. She is incredibly smart, but not in books. She is smart at playing games. She knows exactly when to drop her chin, when to let her voice tremble, and when to look like a helpless little bird with a broken wing. It is the only trick she has ever needed because our family rewarded it every single time. Last year, when Jillian got fired from her highly paid internship at a marketing firm, a job my father begged his friends to give her, she didn't say, "I messed up." She came home sobbing, saying, "The boss expects too much, and I am terrified I'll end up cold and miserable like Tessa." My mother instantly went into rescue mode. She stroked Jillian's hair and said, "You are just too gentle for the corporate world, sweetie. You aren't hard and cold like your sister." That word, cold, was the chain they used to tie me down. It meant, you are strong, so you take the pain. She is weak, so we must protect her. But here is the honest truth. Jillian is not naturally weak. She is weak because every single time she made a mistake, my parents built a wall around her before she could even say sorry. My mother used to be a high-end real estate agent. She loved controlling big, beautiful houses. But 5 years ago she lost her license after a nasty legal dispute. When her career vanished, she came home to a silent house and needed something new to control. Jillian gladly became her new project. Every fake panic attack, every failed exam, and every lost job gave my mother her power back. It proved she was still important. I was the exact opposite. I paid off my own student loans by 25. I was managing a massive software development team by 28. I never called home crying. I only called to share my victories. But victories didn't give my mother anything to fix, so she created 3 unspoken rules for our house. Rule 1, never question Jillian's tears. Rule 2, never ask where the money goes. Rule 3, Tessa will always take the blame because Tessa is cold enough to handle it. I used to think being strong was a good thing. I didn't realize until I was sitting on that freezing train that strong was just their secret word for punching bag. And then there is my father. Dad spent 40 years as a bank manager, a man completely obsessed with perfect numbers and balanced accounts. But in his own home, he ignored the biggest crime of all. His entire strategy for surviving our family was one single, cowardly sentence: "Let's just keep the peace, Tessa." He said it when I was 10 and lost my school play role. He said it when they ruined my graduation. And he said it tonight, while $500,000 of stolen family money sat hiding in my sister's bedroom. He loved me, I think, but love without bravery is absolutely useless. The train finally hissed to a stop at 2 a.m. I stepped onto the icy platform. A sleek black town car was already waiting for me. I climbed inside, and the driver took me straight to the edge of the woods. Great Aunt Farah's massive stone estate looked like a glowing castle in the dark snowstorm. My muscles were completely numb from the freezing wind, and my hands were blistered and raw from dragging my entire life through the slush. But the absolute moment I crossed the threshold of her heavy oak doors, the biting, bitter cold of my family died instantly. Farah was my late grandmother's sister. She was 78 years old, fierce, incredibly wealthy, and the only person in the world who saw right through my parents' lies. She loved me like her own daughter. When my beloved grandmother passed away from a terrible illness, Farah promised her she would always protect me. Farah threw open the heavy oak doors herself, wrapped in a thick velvet robe. She didn't ask me why I was there. She saw the snow in my hair and the heavy suitcases in my hands. She just pulled me into her warm chest. She smelled like lavender and old books. exactly like my grandmother. They are blind, child, she whispered, stroking my freezing hair. But you are finally awake. I sat by her roaring fireplace, drinking hot tea. My phone remained completely silent. For the next 21 days, I would completely disappear from my parents' world. The next morning, the winter sun reflected blindingly off the snow-covered grounds of the massive estate. I was sitting in Great Aunt Farah's beautiful wood-paneled library. Mitchell, my fiancé, had caught the first emergency flight back from his business trip in London the moment Farah called him. He walked into the grand library, his thick wool coat still smelling of the freezing wind, and wrapped his strong arms securely around me. He didn't interrogate me, he just pressed his chin to the top of my head and rid my heavy silence. "I'll make us some strong black coffee," he said softly, squeezing my shoulders. I sat at the heavy mahogany desk. My hands drifted across the polished wood. I was holding a heartbreaking secret I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Mitchell. That morning, before sunrise, Farah had handed me my late grandmother's leather-bound diary. The pages smelled of dried roses and old ink. Reading her elegant handwriting, I discovered a dark truth. My mother had stolen my grandmother's jewelry 30 years ago, using the exact same fake tears Jillian used to avoid punishment. My mother didn't invent this toxic game, she inherited it. Sitting in that grand library, staring at the frozen lake outside, I made a firm decision. The generational poison stopped with me. I reached over and powered my phone completely off. For 21 excruciating days, I became a total ghost. Here is what I didn't know while I was hiding away. The night they threw me out into the harsh snowstorm, my sister's grand illusion was already crashing down. 3 weeks before the $500,000 vanished from the safe, Jillian had proudly announced she was hosting a massive winter charity gala for the town's 200 wealthiest donors. She stood in our living room like she had just won a gold medal. "I'm launching my luxury event planning business," she boasted, twirling her expensive hair. My parents clapped like trained seals. Nobody mentioned that Jillian couldn't even organize her own closet, let alone a high society fundraiser with giant ice sculptures, a live jazz band, and a $10,000 non-refundable catering deposit. It was all a desperate, shiny distraction to hide her constant failures. A week before the money disappeared, Farah had warned me. We were having afternoon tea in the city. "Tessa," she had said, her sharp, wise eyes locking onto mine, "your mother is setting you up to take the fall for Jillian's massive debts. I see the greed in her eyes. She did the exact same thing to me when we were young." I hadn't fully understood her warning then, but now the trap was crystal clear. If you have ever sat at a family table and felt completely invisible, I see your pain. I have lived it. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been the family scapegoat. Hit that subscribe button because what happened during my 21 days of silence changed my entire universe. Day 1 of my disappearance. I sat in the estate's glass conservatory, surrounded by Farah's blooming orchids, working remotely on my laptop. I managed my software development team as if my heart wasn't completely shattered. Nobody at my company knew my parents had tossed me out like garbage 14 hours ago. You get dangerously good at wearing a fake, professional smile when your family treats you like an emotional punching bag. Day 2. I turned my phone on for exactly 10 seconds. 0 missed calls, 0 texts from my mother, 0 check-ins from my father. The silence was deafening but honestly expected. They were simply waiting for the usual cycle to repeat. The part where I break down, call first, apologize for upsetting the golden child, and fix Jillian's mess. I turned the phone back off and shoved it in a drawer. Day 3. Mitchell sat across from me at the breakfast table, reviewing his legal case files. He is a man of action. "Do you want me to drive over there and demand they give back your grandmother's heirloom necklace they kept?" he asked, his voice thick with protective anger. "No," I replied smoothly, pouring another cup of coffee. "I want to see how long they can survive without me fixing their lives." That night, under the warm glow of a brass desk lamp, I opened a blank digital spreadsheet. I created strict columns: date, the lie, the stolen money, and the blame. I started typing out every single time they had manipulated me. I wasn't just crying anymore, I was mapping out my survival. 4 days passed, complete radio silence from the people who gave me life. It proved they never truly worried about my safety. They only worried about losing their free servant. Day 5. My phone buzzed at 10:35 a.m. It was Dad. For a split second, the little girl inside my heart hoped he was calling to apologize. I answered, "Tessa?" His voice wasn't sad. It was frantic, fast, and highly annoyed. "Yes, Dad." I could hear the television blaring in the background. "Listen, Your sister is having a total meltdown. The house Wi-Fi router is broken, and she desperately needs to email the gala invitations to the mayor. What is the administrator password? I let the heavy silence hang in the air for 10 agonizing seconds. Is that really why you are calling, Dad? Not to ask if I froze to death in the snow? Not to ask if I have food? He cleared his throat nervously. Don't be so dramatic, Tessa. We just need the password. The gala is falling apart. Figure it out yourself, I whispered, and I hung up the phone. Mitchell looked up from his papers, his jaw clenched tight. What did he want? The Wi-Fi password, I said, a bitter, painful laugh escaping my lips. My mother threw me out because my sister faked a panic attack, and 5 days later my father called just to fix their internet connection. I closed my laptop, placing my hands flat on the desk. My heart felt heavy, but the emotional fog was finally gone. I was officially done being the padding for my family's sharp edges. Day 7. The grand estate was deeply quiet, filled only with the crackling of the massive stone fireplaces and the faint scent of roasted chestnuts. I was sitting in the library when my phone screen finally lit up. 2 missed calls from my mother, 1 voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away. I let it sit there like a ticking time bomb. Later that evening, Mitchell and I were sitting by the fire. I put the phone on speaker and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, sharp and demanding, like a military general giving orders. Tessa, this childish tantrum has gone on long enough, she snapped. The winter gala is in 2 weeks. The caterers are demanding their $10,000 deposit, and Jillian's business accounts are temporarily frozen. I need you to come home tomorrow and sign the trust release forms so we can access the emergency funds. Jillian is willing to put your jealousy behind her if you just sign the papers. We need to move forward. That was it. Exactly 42 seconds. I listened to it twice, not because I missed a word, but because the pure selfishness of it took my breath away. Listen to how she frames it, I told Mitchell, my voice cold and steady. I was in full software manager mode now. Jillian is willing to forgive me. She wants me to forgive the sister who framed me, just so I can sign over the rest of the family money to pay for her fake gala. Mitchell leaned forward, his jaw tight with anger. That is not a mother calling her daughter. That is a bank robber calling the vault manager. I saved the voicemail. I wanted to keep it as a permanent reminder of exactly how my mother sounded when she chose money and lies over her own flesh and blood. Day 8. Instead of a text, I received an urgent calendar invitation in my email at 8:22 p.m. It was from Jillian. I opened it on my laptop. It was a 4-paragraph email, heavily decorated with crying emojis and exclamation marks. Tess, I know you are hurting, but I am hurting too. My anxiety is so bad because the gala is almost here. Mom and Dad are super stressed about the money. I hate that you are making our family suffer right now. Can you please just come back and manage the VIP donor seating chart? I am too fragile to handle the seating logistics. The gala will fail without your tech skills. Can you just stop being stubborn for Mom and Dad's sake? 4 paragraphs, 3 mentions of her precious gala. 0 mentions of the missing $500,000. 0 apology for getting me thrown out into a freezing snowstorm. In her twisted mind, she hadn't done anything wrong. She was actually blaming me for the family's stress because I wasn't there to magically fix her massive disaster. I took a screenshot of the email and added it to my digital spreadsheet. Row 16. Jillian didn't want her sister back. She wanted her unpaid employee back. I didn't reply. That night, after Mitchell went to bed, I found Great Aunt Farah sitting in the dim conservatory, sipping a small glass of warm cherry syrup. The moonlight caught the silver in her hair. I sat quietly across from her. Aunt Farah, I whispered, the weight of the week finally crashing down on me. What did you mean when you said my mother is doing to me what she did to you? Farah set her glass down. Her wise, wrinkled face grew very serious. 30 years ago, Tessa, I owned a beautiful summer cabin by the lake. Your mother, Laura, made a terrible, illegal investment and owed a lot of dangerous people money. When the debt collectors came, she didn't confess. She cried, she screamed. She told your grandparents that I had tricked her into the bad investment. She sobbed so beautifully that they forced me to sign the deed of my cabin over to her to pay off her debts. I gripped the arms of my chair. My stomach twisted into tight knots. The script was identical. She learned at a very young age, Farah continued, her voice filled with ancient sadness, that tears are a currency. If she cried hard enough, she never had to pay for her own sins. And now, she has taught Jillian the exact same wicked trick. Why didn't you fight back? I asked, my voice shaking. Because I wanted to keep the family peace, Farah said bitterly. And it cost me everything. Do not make my mistake, Tessa. You must break the chain. Just then, the heavy library doors opened. Mitchell walked in, holding a thick manila folder. He hadn't been sleeping. He had been working. I hired a private investigator 2 days ago, Mitchell said, tossing the folder onto the coffee table. The photos spilled out. The $500,000 from the safe isn't just missing, Tessa. Jillian didn't lose it. She wired the entire $500,000 to a fake offshore vendor to pretend she had international luxury clients for her fake event planning business. She got scammed by a fake company. The money is entirely gone. My blood ran ice cold. My parents hadn't just kicked me out. They had kicked me out to cover up a $500,000 federal crime. Suddenly, a thick, expensive envelope arrived by private courier the next morning. The private courier didn't just bring an envelope. He handed Farah's butler a heavy, crushed velvet box. Inside the box rested a shiny, silver-plated VIP ticket for the Winter Charity Gala. But tucked underneath the glamorous pass was a tightly folded, highly complex legal document. I recognized my mother's handwriting on a sticky note attached to it. Sign this before you arrive. Love, Mom. I placed it on the heavy mahogany desk. Mitchell, using his sharp legal eyes, quickly scanned the pages. His face turned completely pale. Tessa, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, protective whisper. They didn't invite you to a family reunion. They invited you to a legal trap. This is a strict non-disclosure agreement. If you sign this, you are legally gagged from ever reporting the stolen $500,000 to the police. I stood perfectly still, looking out the grand window at the falling snow. My parents weren't trying to fix our relationship. They were trying to buy my permanent silence so Jillian could avoid going to federal prison. 2 weeks until the massive gala. The clock was ticking loudly for everyone, especially for my sister. But Great Aunt Farah had her own powerful network. Farah glided into the library, holding her ringing cell phone, a sharp, knowing smile on her wrinkled face. My wealthy country club friends are gossiping like wild birds, she announced. Your sister is completely drowning in the deep end. She just wrote a massive rubber check to a famous artist for a 10-foot celebrity ice sculpture. The check bounced, and the artist is threatening to call the local news channels. I pictured Jillian panicking in her designer clothes. For her entire life, every time she made a tiny mistake, someone lifted her out of the water before she could even get wet. Now the water was over her head, and the sharks were circling. For the first time in my life, I refused to throw her a life jacket. But the most heartbreaking blow came on Wednesday afternoon. Aunt Harper, my mother's older sister, called my cell phone. She was absolutely hysterical, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Tessa, honey, please tell me it isn't true. Aunt Harper sobbed into the phone. Your mother made me take out a second mortgage on my house to loan her $20,000. She told the entire family that you stole the emergency trust fund and ran away to Europe with a dangerous stranger. She said you left Jillian completely bankrupt. The library went dead silent. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. My mother had told Aunt Harper, and who knows how many others, that I was the thief. She would rather let 200 of the town's most elite citizens believe I was a disgusting criminal than admit her precious golden child was a fraud. I gripped the edge of the desk. The sadness in my chest instantly burned away, replaced by a clean, blazing fire of pure anger. She could kick me out into a snowstorm. She could ignore me for weeks, but she absolutely does not get to rewrite my life story and destroy my good name. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the private investigator's undeniable, stamped photos of Jillian's offshore wire transfers, and carefully placed them inside a sleek, bright red presentation folder. In project management, when a system keeps failing, you don't just fix the final error, you expose the root cause. My mother was the root cause. Jillian was the failure. And the data never ever lies. Mitchell watched me slide the red folder into my designer handbag. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man watching a sleeping dragon finally wake up. I am going to that gala, I told him, my voice colder than the ice outside. And I am not going empty-handed. Saturday morning, the winter storm outside Great Aunt Farah's estate was raging, completely covering the windows in thick white frost. I was sitting at the massive mahogany dining table, my laptop open. My digital spreadsheet now had 42 rows of data, dates, stolen money, fake tears, and every time my parents covered up a disaster. In my software career, when a computer program completely crashes, you don't just restart it, you dig into the code until you find the exact virus. Jillian was the virus. My mother was the hacker who programmed her. As I was reviewing the offshore wire transfers Mitchell had found, I stumbled across something that made my blood run completely cold. I ran a deep security trace on the Winter Charity Gala's donation link. Jillian hadn't just created a fake event planning business. She had built a fraudulent charity website using my stolen identity. She used my social security number and my old software company credentials to register the fake charity. If the gala failed, or if the police investigated the missing $500,000, all the digital footprints would point directly to me. I was officially the perfect scapegoat. Mitchell walked into the dining room carrying 2 cups of hot tea. He saw my face and immediately set the cups down. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "She stole my identity," I whispered, turning the laptop screen toward him. "She registered the entire scam in my name." Mitchell stared at the screen. "This isn't just a family argument anymore, Tessa. This is a massive federal felony." I want to pause here for a second. If you are still reading this, it means this story is hitting close to home, and I am so grateful for that. Right now I am staring at a laptop screen that proves my own flesh and blood tried to send me to prison to save themselves. If you have ever had that horrifying moment where you finally saw your family's true dark colors, tell me about it in the comments, and hit that like button if you want to see exactly how I destroy this gala. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a secret text message from my father. It wasn't an apology, it was a cowardly bribe. "Tessa," the text read, "I will secretly wire you $50,000 from my personal retirement pension. Just sign the non-disclosure agreement your mother sent, skip the gala, and stay in New York. Please, just keep the peace." I stared at the glowing words. My father, the strict bank manager who preached about honesty his whole life, was offering me hush money to protect a criminal. I didn't type a reply. I just took a screenshot and sent it straight to the printer. I slipped the printed text into my bright red presentation folder, right next to the wire transfer photos. That evening, Great Aunt Farah called an emergency meeting in her grand library. She didn't invite friends. She invited her ruthless, high-powered estate attorney, Mr. Sterling. He wore a sharp gray suit and carried a thick leather briefcase. "Laura thinks she is playing a clever game," Farah said, her voice shaking with protective fury. "But we own the entire board." Mr. Sterling slid a heavy stack of watermarked documents across the table toward me. "Tessa, your great-aunt Farah has officially transferred her entire $10 million estate, all her properties, and her full power of attorney into your name, effective immediately," he explained. "Your mother has been permanently and legally completely cut out. If Laura ever tries to touch a single penny of this family's money again, she will be arrested." Tears filled my eyes, not out of sadness, but out of pure, overwhelming gratitude. For 30 years, my parents made me feel like I was worth absolutely nothing. Now the wisest woman in the family was trusting me with her entire legacy. I signed the documents with a steady hand. That night, Mitchell and I sat by the roaring fire. He had spent the last 3 hours preparing a brutal legal strike. "I have drafted a formal cease and desist order," he said, placing it into my red folder. "And I have a contact at the local police department on standby. If they try to force you to sign that NDA at the gala, the police will walk through the doors 5 minutes later." "I am going to that gala," I said softly, looking at the bright red folder. Mitchell set his pen down. "Are you going to save them, or are you going to stop them?" "I am going to stop them," I answered firmly. "For my grandmother, for Farah, and for the little girl who was always told she was never good enough. I refuse to let Jillian ruin my name to save her own skin." I didn't write a dramatic speech. I didn't practice crying in front of a mirror like my sister always did. I had spent my entire professional career walking into boardrooms full of angry investors and laying out the cold, hard facts. I knew exactly how to speak the truth in a room full of lies. The clock was ticking. The gala was only hours away. Saturday evening. The freezing blizzard was finally slowing down, leaving behind a thick, dangerous layer of solid ice across the city. Great Aunt Farah refused to let me walk into a trap unprotected. She insisted on hiring her personal private security team, 2 massive, stone-faced men in thick black coats, to escort Mitchell and me to the gala. We arrived at Bellini's grand luxury ballroom. The icy parking lot was packed with expensive vehicles, including Uncle Richard's shiny blue truck, Aunt Harper's white sedan, and Cousin Morgan's silver minivan. 68 of the town's most elite residents, plus our entire extended family, were walking inside to celebrate a fake charity built on a $500,000 crime. Right outside the grand entrance, under the glowing Bellini's sign, we walked straight into a screaming match. A famous local ice sculptor, a tall man in a paint-splattered winter coat, was blocking the double doors, furiously demanding his payment. "Your check bounced," he yelled loudly at my mother, who was desperately trying to shush him while looking around nervously to see if anyone was watching. Mitchell gently placed a firm, protective hand on my lower back and guided me past the chaos. We stepped through the heavy glass doors and left the freezing wind behind. Bellini's ballroom was dripping in expensive, over-the-top winter decorations. However, beneath the smell of roasted garlic and warm bread, the room smelled strongly of cheap artificial pine spray, desperately trying to mask the tension. Aunt Rachel was already seated near the exit, sipping sparkling water. She watched the room like an eagle. When she saw me, she gave one sharp, confirming nod. I took a deep breath. My mother finally rushed inside, her face bright red and panicked from the argument outside. She saw me standing near the coat check. Her fake hostess smile froze instantly. Her eyes darted straight to the bright red presentation folder tightly clutched in my right hand. She knew immediately that I hadn't come to quietly sign her illegal non-disclosure agreement. Jillian was in the center of the massive room, wearing a flashy silver sequined gown that looked entirely too expensive for someone with frozen bank accounts. She was sweating profusely, her makeup starting to run, as she nervously darted from table to table. I stood quietly and overheard her frantically trying to charge Aunt Harper and Uncle Richard an extra $500 in cash to upgrade to the VIP Platinum table. She was desperately trying to scrape together physical cash right there on the floor to pay Bellini's angry catering manager, who was hovering menacingly near the kitchen doors. I didn't say a word. I simply walked over and sat down at a quiet table near the back. I pulled my phone from my purse and logged straight into my old software company's admin portal. With 3 quick, precise taps on the screen, I intentionally triggered an emergency fraud freeze on the fake charity website Jillian had illegally built using my stolen identity. The exact second the donation portal locked down, Jillian's phone chimed violently from across the room. Jillian pulled her phone out of her silver purse. She stared at the screen, and the color completely drained from her face. She looked like she had just been slapped by a ghost. The digital money trap was officially shut forever. She couldn't steal another dime. Then, the heavy crystal chandeliers dimmed. The jazz band stopped playing. It was time for the main presentation. A massive projector screen rolled down against the far wall. Instead of an anniversary slideshow, Jillian had created a fake charity mission video to convince the wealthy donors to give her money. It was completely insane. It showed 52 heavily photoshopped pictures of Jillian pretending to build houses, feed the poor, and hand out giant novelty checks to actors. I counted the photos. I appeared in exactly 4 of them, but she had literally blurred my face out in every single picture to make it look like she was the only hero doing the work. Several of our older relatives immediately noticed the strange edits. Uncle Richard crossed his arms and frowned deeply at the blurry photos. Cousin Morgan tilted her head, squinting at the screen, then looked over at me in total confusion. I took a slow sip of my ice water. I was perfectly calm. I was a professional software project manager watching a deeply broken system finally crash in real time. My mother stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room, completely ignoring the disaster happening right in front of her. The lights flashed back on, harsh and bright. Jillian snatched the microphone from the stand. Her hands were visibly shaking, and the silver sequins on her dress caught the light like a disco ball spinning out of control. She plastered on her most tragic, desperate smile. "Thank you all for coming," Jillian began, her voice quivering perfectly. "This charity is my entire life. We are here to help the helpless. Family is about supporting each other through dark times." She pointed straight at me, her eyes pooling with fake tears. "My older sister Tessa has struggled with deep anger and coldness for years. It breaks my heart. But tonight is about forgiveness and healing. To prove love conquers all, I am asking this beautiful room for an emergency $100,000 matching donation right now to save our mission." The wealthy donors murmured, pulling out their checkbooks. My parents proudly raised their champagne glasses, completely ignoring the massive fraud they were cheering for. I didn't stay seated. I stood up. I didn't speak from my table like a quiet guest. I walked straight up the center aisle, my heavy black boots echoing against the hardwood floor. I walked right onto the main stage. I didn't ask for the microphone. I took it right out of Jillian's sweaty hand. I placed the bright red presentation folder flat on the wooden podium. The entire room went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. "Jillian is right about one thing," I said, my voice echoing through the massive ballroom. It wasn't angry. It was the calm, icy tone of a project manager announcing a total system failure. "Tonight is about the truth, but there is absolutely no charity here." A loud wave of shocked gasps swept across the room. My mother jumped to her feet, her face turning pale white. "Tessa, stop this right now! Security!" she shrieked, but Farah's two massive bodyguards stepped forward, blocking the stage. Nobody moved. I opened the red folder. 2 weeks ago, my parents threw me out into a freezing blizzard, I announced, holding up the stamped financial documents for the crowd to see. They didn't kick me out because of anger. They kicked me out because my sister stole $500,000 from our family's emergency trust fund and wired it to a fake offshore bank account. She got scammed, and my parents wanted to bury the evidence. Jillian stumbled backward, her mouth hanging wide open like a fish out of water. "And this gala?" I continued, turning to the sea of wealthy donors. "She used my stolen social security number to build this fake charity to scam all of you. That is why the donation portal just shut down for fraud. If you wrote a check tonight, you are funding a massive federal felony." Absolute panic erupted. Like a hive of angry bees, the elite donors instantly pulled out their cell phones, frantically calling their banks to cancel their checks. To prove it wasn't just a wild story, I held up the crushed velvet box. My parents even sent me a legal non-disclosure agreement and secretly offered me a $50,000 bribe just to keep my mouth shut tonight. The proof is right here. I slapped my father's printed text message against the podium. For 5 excruciating, suffocating seconds, the entire ballroom fell into a dead, horrifying silence. Nobody blinked, nobody breathed. The sheer, undeniable weight of their total ruin hung suspended in the artificial pine-scented air, locking my parents in a frozen nightmare before the absolute explosion hit. Suddenly, Aunt Harper stood up from table 4. Her face was red with pure, uncontrollable rage. She pointed a trembling finger right at my mother. "You lied to me, Laura. You swore Tessa stole the money. You made me take out a $20,000 second mortgage on my house to pay for this fake party." Aunt Harper's scream shattered whatever illusion was left in the room. My mother couldn't speak. Her perfect fake reality had just violently crashed into a brick wall. Uncle Richard stood up next, his face hard as stone. "You are a disgrace, Laura," he growled loud enough for the whole room to hear. Jillian looked around wildly. She was searching for a shield, a rescue, a magical excuse. But the wealthy donors were shouting. The catering manager was storming toward the stage demanding his cash, and the room was closing in on her. The water was finally over her head, and no one was pulling her out. She dropped her silver purse. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. She didn't walk out with her head held high. She panicked like a trapped criminal. Jillian shoved past a waiter, knocking a tray of expensive glasses to the floor, and sprinted out the back kitchen doors into the freezing alleyway. My mother tried to stop the angry donors from leaving, begging and pleading with them, but they pushed right past her in absolute disgust. She chased after Jillian, disappearing through the swinging kitchen doors. I gently closed the red folder. I stepped down from the stage. Mitchell was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, looking incredibly proud. I glanced back at table 1. My father hadn't moved a single inch. He just sat there, staring blankly at his empty plate as the entire gala collapsed around him. The massive ballroom didn't just empty, it completely shattered. The wealthy donors rushed for the coat check, furious whispers buzzing through the air like angry hornets. Suddenly, sharp flashing red and blue lights pierced through the thick, frosted windows of Bellini's. The local police had arrived. The elite donors hadn't just canceled their checks. They had dialed 911 to report massive financial fraud. I stood near the exit, my heart beating in a steady, calm rhythm. I felt no guilt. Mitchell and I walked out into the grand marble lobby. The scene was absolute chaos. My mother, Laura, was backed against the elegant reception desk, surrounded by 2 stern-faced police officers. "You don't understand, officers. It's just a tiny family misunderstanding," she cried frantically, her expensive mascara running down her pale cheeks like thick black ink. But her fake, charming teacher voice didn't work on the police. They were demanding to see the charity's official tax permits, which of course did not exist. And where was Jillian? She didn't stay to defend her precious mother. She had bolted out the back kitchen doors into the freezing alleyway. But she didn't get far. Mitchell's sharp-eyed private investigator was waiting right by the icy dumpsters. Just as Jillian tried to scramble into a fleeing Uber, the investigator stepped forward and slapped a massive, heavy stack of civil lawsuit papers right against her chest. "You are officially served for federal identity theft," he told her coldly. Jillian collapsed right there in the dirty slush, sobbing loudly. But this time there was no audience to save her, and the tears were finally real. Back in the lobby, my father finally dragged himself out of the dining room. He looked small, broken, and 20 years older. He was staring at the floor, probably hoping to sneak out the side door. but Great Aunt Farah stepped directly into his path, blocking the exit. She stood tall and fierce, wrapped in her thick velvet winter coat, looking like an absolute queen of justice. "You traded your brave, brilliant daughter to protect a cheap, lying criminal, Greg," Farah hissed. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noisy lobby like a razor blade. "You spent your whole life hiding from the truth just to keep the peace. Well, the peace is dead, and so is your inheritance. You and Laura are permanently erased from my will. You have absolutely nothing." My father's shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Before he could even process Farah's brutal sentence, Aunt Harper stormed up to him, completely ignoring the police officers nearby. She shoved my father hard in the chest. "I want my $20,000 back by Monday morning, Greg." Aunt Harper screamed, humiliating him in front of the remaining guests. "You and your wicked wife stole my house money. If that cash isn't in my bank account, I am joining Tessa's lawsuit and sending both of your daughters to jail." My father just shrunk down into his coat, a cowardly man finally crushed by the heavy consequences of his lifelong silence. For 30 years, his only rule was don't upset your mother. Now his entire world was in ashes because he refused to protect the one child who actually deserved it. I watched them fall apart from a distance. I didn't feel the urge to run over and fix it. I didn't feel the need to absorb their pain. Mitchell stepped up behind me and gently wrapped my warm woolen scarf around my neck to protect me from the cold draft of the doors. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked gently, his eyes full of deep respect. I looked at the chaos one last time. I didn't wait to go home and write a long, polite email setting boundaries. I didn't need to explain my conditions to people who were actively trying to destroy me. Right there, standing in the bright lobby of Bellini's, I pulled my cell phone from my purse. I opened my contacts. I clicked on my mother's name and pressed block. I clicked on my father's name and pressed block. I clicked on Jillian's name and pressed block. With 3 simple, quiet taps on a glowing screen, I completely erased them from my digital life forever. No warnings, no second chances, just permanent, heavy silence. "Yes," I said, taking a deep breath of the fresh, icy air as the heavy glass doors opened. "I am finally ready." 3 months later, the brutal winter snow had completely melted, replaced by a bright, warm spring. Mitchell and I were standing on the wooden deck of our brand new lakeside home, a peaceful sanctuary we bought entirely with our own hard-earned money. The fresh morning air smelled like sweet pine needles and clear, rushing water, a million miles away from the cheap artificial pine spray of Bellini's ballroom. There was no more screaming, no more walking on eggshells, and absolutely no more fake tears. Our house was filled with a completely different kind of energy now. We had just adopted a golden retriever rescue puppy named Barnaby. He was clumsy, fiercely loyal, and completely honest with his love, the exact opposite of the family I had left behind. I was sitting in a comfortable wicker chair, drinking sweet iced tea, and watching Barnaby happily chase butterflies in the grass, when Mitchell walked outside holding his tablet. He sat beside me, wrapping his warm arm around my shoulders, and gently slid the glowing screen into my view. It was a tiny local news article. Former real estate agent and daughter plead guilty to charity fraud. The article stated that the judge had sentenced my mother and Jillian to hundreds of hours of heavy community service and forced them to pay back every single stolen penny, including Aunt Harper's $20,000 second mortgage. I read the headline once. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I didn't feel a single drop of pity. With a calm, steady finger, I simply swiped the screen away and completely closed the browser. The heavy chain that had tied me to their toxic circus for 30 years was finally permanently broken. Later that afternoon, Great Aunt Farah arrived in her sleek town car for our weekly Sunday dinner. She didn't bring chaos or drama. She brought a freshly baked homemade apple pie and a small, delicate velvet jewelry box. We sat around my bright kitchen island, laughing and sharing joyful stories. Then, the room grew quiet. Farah reached out, her wrinkled hands steady, and gently placed the velvet box into my palms. Inside rested my late grandmother's vintage gold locket, the exact priceless heirloom my mother had tried so hard to steal. "This belongs to the true protector of this family, Tessa," Farah whispered, her wise eyes shining brightly with proud, genuine tears. "You saved your grandmother's legacy. You broke the terrible curse." I clasped the cold gold chain around my neck, and for the very first time in my entire life, I felt completely, unconditionally worthy of love. I didn't keep the heavy luggage in my closet. I actually threw those 2 leather suitcases straight into the town dump the very next day. I absolutely refused to keep a physical monument to my painful past. Instead, I built something beautiful. Using my extensive software management skills, I launched a free online mentorship program for young, underprivileged girls who wanted to work in tech. I wanted to teach them how to be truly strong, not the fake punching bag strong my parents used to abuse me, but truly, fiercely empowered. There was once a little girl who gave up her school play and retreated into the dark shadows, a teenager who foolishly thought her only value in the world was fixing other people's broken messes. She kept running on an exhausting hamster wheel, praying that if she just paid enough bills and solved enough fake crises, her parents would magically wake up and love her. She was always enough. She just needed a freezing train ride, and the absolute courage to stop fixing the people who were actively breaking her. True family is never defined by matching DNA or forced holiday dinners. True family is the people who stand fiercely right beside you when the worst storm hits, who hold the umbrella over your head, and who never ever ask you to shrink yourself just to make someone else look bigger. Endurance is a tragic thing to waste on toxic people. Radical honesty, deep self-respect, and unbreakable boundaries are the beautiful new foundations of my life. If this story resonated with your heart, and if you felt the heavy truth in these words about breaking toxic cycles and finally claiming your own powerful worth, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's keep building a beautiful community where we share powerful, truthful stories like this one. Stories with real depth that remind us we are never alone and we are always enough. Stay connected because your journey and your true story matter just as much.